Yeah. Hey, hi, hello. It's Boomer, your local neighborhood goblin bartender. Yeah, I don't know much about podcasting or technology. All I really know about is running my tavern and, flirting with the locals that may be traveling or passing through on their campaign. Maybe one day I'll go on a campaign on my own, but until then, you're listening to Campaign Spotlight.
Hey there, mech racers and mobile frames.
Welcome to another episode of Campaign Spotlight.
This week, we'll be chatting with Erika, who's been running a campaign using multiple TTRPG systems.
Let's roll initiative.
In the year 265 of the solar calendar, the merchants and mercenaries of the Solar Union have turned the weight of their capital towards the once backwater agricultural planet Bontral. In the wake of the war 20 years ago, a tenuous peace has held between the landowner mercenary armies, the noble Bantrache families, the Old Way Anabaptist settler farmers, and the organized crime families of the Gazena, and the revolutionary Bontral Free Forces. Solar Union troops remain on standby to intervene if the quote-unquote few isolated spats occurring on the planet spill over into a second war for Bontral. And in the midst of it all, your job is to build a cell phone tower. Your squad has been hired as mechanized cavalry and battlefield engineers, building a more advanced telecommunications network to supplement the planet-wide satellite relay chat system. Pima Kansere, you have fought your way from the Brederbund refugee settlement to join the BFF and fight for freedom of self-determination for the planet, following your Ijad faith. You and your heavy airborne transport vehicle, Big Mama, are eyes in the sky over the field. Ozzy Ein, as the scion of a Bantrache noble family who has renounced your birthright to race mobile frames and join the revolutionaries, your frame Roadrunner has the speed advantage. You're in position to scout the target site. Orchid Gertner, a former frame-born survivalist raised from an early age to pilot modified mobile frames, your frame, O Unilateralis, is, as far as you are concerned, an inseparable extension of yourself. Its industrial tentacle arms are well suited to invade and disable hostile mobile frames, but also towards technical work, ready to handle the installation of the tower. Ivy Arc, your history as a prisoner soldier sealed into powered armor as a mobile prison, and your massive earth mover turned artillery platform, the Beating Heart, put you squarely as the muscle of the squad. You sit ready to engage any hostile targets with extreme prejudice. Your radar systems ping with a hostile signal. Something is on its way to stop you. What do you do?
Wow! Erika, welcome to Campaign Spotlight.
Hello.
That is a hell of an opening monologue. I want to play in this campaign so badly now.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun to play. Technically it is on, I think, indefinite hiatus, but we played for about 3 years total before we went on hiatus, and it has been a roller coaster the whole time.
That sounds really exciting. 3 years and at least 3 different TTRPG systems?
I think altogether we've played at least 5. Microscope, Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands. The main bulk of the campaign was played in Beam Saber. We've played Fiasco, and we have played, could swear there was another one, but, because we played Microscope twice. That's what it was.
Wow! And this is all one campaign?
Yes. All one story.
I can't wait to hear more about it. First, tell our audience a little bit about your experience playing tabletop games and as a DM.
I've been playing tabletop games since, I want to say, 2016 or 17. I spent a while, quite a while down the indie story gaming rabbit hole. I'm specifically, I got into tabletop gaming through being a fan of the podcast Friends at the Table. One of our players in this campaign once described us as a Friends at the Table cover band. But I've always really enjoyed the sort of collaborative storytelling, and just never had a chance to put together a group. But after spending some time, playing other tabletop games, and in fact, writing a couple hacks of tabletop games of my own, I started this campaign with some friends, and we decided from the get-go that we wanted to go really heavy on the world building before we ever actually, get in our mobile frames and start fighting. So, we started out with a game of Microscope, which I believe y'all have talked about on the show before.
We have. We'll link to that episode in the show notes. Thanks for plugging it. We had a lot of fun playing. It was just the two of us, but at the time we were like, oh, this could absolutely be a way to start a campaign. And you literally did exactly that. Like, this is the first phase of your campaign was just a game of Microscope with all your players?
Absolutely. So before we did that, we had decided that we wanted to take our inspiration from a separate game called Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands by D. Vincent Baker and Megwee Baker. D. Vincent Baker is a legend in the indie tabletop game scene. He created Apocalypse World, which became the Powered by the Apocalypse engine, which is probably still, I think, the most popular of the, indie non-D20 systems.
Yeah.
But Firebrands, while I think technically it bills itself as a Powered by the Apocalypse game, eschews dice almost entirely to play. It plays more like a party game.
Okay.
And I'm sure we will go into more detail on it in a minute, but it comes packaged with its own setting of the planet Bontral. It is set within the broader fictional universe of the solar calendar, or of Mobile Frame Zero. Mobile Frame Zero itself being a game by D. Vincent Baker and Joshua A.C. Newman, that plays as a tabletop tactical war game in the vein of something like Warhammer, except that you play it with Legos. You build all of your robots out of Legos. Your robot gets its arm shot off. You pull the arm off the Lego. So it's an extremely fun game if you're into the whole tabletop tactical thing, which I am unfortunately not.
Riley extremely is off mic. He just said, "Oh, that's pretty sick."
I really, I was a Warhammer player as a kid. I definitely get the appeal of the whole tabletop tactical thing. I just don't have the math or the patience for it. Because for me, it's all about the storytelling, which is why I end up playing these kinds of games more than I end up playing, tactical games about taking 5-foot steps and doing XD6 damage to a goblin.
Right. In Firebrands, you never have to take out your ruler, pretty much, right?
In Firebrands, there's no table. So we knew we had a starting place where we wanted the planet Bontrall as it stands in the Firebrands game, having recently, due to a minor technological development of an obscure biochemical processing technology, suddenly gone from a planet where the land shares are worth nothing to a planet with unknown depth, unknowably deep wellspring of wealth is the way the intro to Firebrands puts it. Which ends up with a three-way conflict between the mercenaries working for the supposed legal landholders, the landowners of the planet, versus the nobility, the Bantrache nobles who have ruled the planet in the Solar Union's absence, and the revolutionaries trying to free their planet of both noble and off-world landowning influence, trying to have, Bontrall for the people rather than for the, powers that be. So as a group, we knew we wanted to have that be the outset of our campaign, but wanted to know more about the planet Bontrall. And a game like Microscope being all about history, where you start with a starting point and an ending point, seemed like the logical conclusion.
Because that's your ending point.
We knew where we wanted it to end up. Yeah, we knew that we wanted to have, by the time the campaign started, roughly the situation laid out in the game of Firebrands. Also because we wanted to play a game of Firebrands to kick us off before we ever hit Beam Saber as well.
And what was the starting point for your Microscope campaign?
So, we knew that we wanted sorry, bear with me 1 second.
Right, because you knew where you wanted to end up. And the way Microscope works is you start with kind of the beginning and end of history, and then you generate inward from there, right? So what was the starting point for that game?
So the starting point, we decided to have the starting literally be the first landing on the planet Bontrall from human colonists. So we wanted the whole of the, I think we called it a couple hundred years because the game itself, Mobile Frame Zero, calls it solar calendar year 245, we figured if it was, say, settled in like the second wave of colonization, it would probably have been there 150, 200 years. So we knew sort of the ballpark of time we were talking about, and we knew where it was ending up. And so we ended up dividing it into the Age of Arrival, the Age of Enclosure, the Thinning, which was the collapse of multiple first and second wave colonies on the planet, the First People's Revolution of Bontrall, and then the Time of Messy Entanglements, taking itself from the object of the game in Mobile Frame Zero explicitly is to create messy entanglements. So we knew that we wanted an era of messy entanglement to drop the players into for the bulk of the campaign.
I love that as a tagline. And it sounds like the history you came up with was actually quite a bit richer than what Mobile Zero Firebrands gives you as a starting point.
Yeah, Firebrands just presupposes 3 factions and gives you very little information on each of them. For the Bantrache, it tells you that they are the aristocratic families of Bontrall, and that your character is the hereditary warrior prince or princess of a noble family, and that the off-world landowners have robbed you of your wealth and estates. You've been raised to believe that the wealth of Bontrall belongs to the Bantrache.
Which is different than how things ended up running in your campaign.
Slightly, because we knew that we would need to end up with the aristocratic families still ruling the planet. But early in our abbreviated History of Montreal game of Microscope, it turned out that the first official colonists to Montreal were Terran, as in, human Anabaptist colonies, who, instead of seeking a corporate sponsor, offered up shares in their colony with the promise of becoming a breadbasket for the Solar Union, and having a place of their own to go be, technology skeptical, shall we say,
Right.
while still participating in Solar Union commerce.
How did that... Oh, go for it. Continue. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, and then immediately the next thing that a player did was, at an event before that actually, workers' movements from the first wave colony of Lakshmi organized, funded, and launched their own unauthorized colony ship to Montreal, meaning the first actual colonists to arrive were largely of Nepalese and Himalayan descent, getting there before the Anabaptists did, and setting up an immediate conflict between the supposed rightful, Solar Union sponsored colonists versus those who arrived as part of a workers' movement, outside of the bounds of Solar Union law.
So you created extra messy entanglements for the messy entanglements game before it even started.
Absolutely. Part of the reason for this is that we also, as players, knew that Beam Saber, as a Forged in the Dark system, is all about what the opposing squads are to you. Therefore, we knew that we needed several factions, not just the three from Firebrands.
Right, because after you played Microscope and then Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands, your main campaign that we haven't even gotten to yet was Beam Saber.
Correct. We did not make things easy for ourselves on the paperwork side, but we knew that we wanted a really rich history for us to delve into. And the end result... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go for it, please.
Well, I was just going to say that the end result was that we gave ourselves several different groups of settlers that would all fall within, that would fall within but go beyond what is listed in the Firebrands game. In fact, we ended up, by the end of our game of Microscope, introducing the group of families who are of Anabaptist sort of cultural heritage, but no longer necessarily religious believers, setting up their own, family systems and clan systems, which evolved into crime families. So we ended up with a faction of ex-Amish gangsters, a faction of, again, nobles, self-declared nobility, a faction of revolutionary-inspired early colonists who tried to set up the planet as somewhere free from Solar Union hegemony. The old way Anabaptists who still, maybe some of them will use mobile frames, but only for agriculture. Or we actually ended up with a character in the game who would not pilot a mobile frame from inside it, but had a mechanical horse that would draw her carriage.
Sure.
Because it moving autonomously is different than piloting it yourself. I see.
I see.
And so we ended up with more factions to play with and more, more political groups on the planet to play off of each other.
And how did that end up working out within the, let's talk first about Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands. How did it affect the gameplay that you had way more factions and that players were coming from different backgrounds than what the source material suggests is the set of options?
Within the initial game of Firebrands that we played, we did not want those characters to necessarily be our characters for the whole campaign. So what we ended up doing was deciding to stick to the factions from the book for the Firebrands game,
okay.
But used that Firebrands game to set the stage. We decided that was the first war for the second war for Bontrall. No, I'm sorry. That was the first quote-unquote war for Bontrall, as the Firebrands game spilled out and sparked a war. And then we decided to set the rest of our campaign 20 years later. So the generation after the war, as tensions rise again and the tenuous peace from the end of the First War starts to shatter.
So that main campaign, now this is Beam Saber. So
yes.
We did Microscope, and then Firebrands, and then there was a 20-year time jump, and then Beam Saber, which is like the bulk of the actual session.
Exactly.
Was there another Microscope game to scope out that 20 years?
Not to scope out that 20 years, but after the first quote-unquote season of play, which culminated in the player squad capturing the Citadel in the middle of the largest city of Freeport, effectively freeing the city from landowner influence, we decided that we wanted to play out the next phase of the war, going from a Cold War to a hot war, zoomed out. So we actually played a game of Microscope, again, covering just the 6 months after the taking of the Citadel, so that we could see sort of what else was happening after the players do, this big heroic action. We wanted to take the camera off of the narrow focus on just the players and let time continue to move outside of them as they recovered from the combat and figured out what their next moves would be.
And you jump back in after that with the same characters.
Mostly with the same characters, yes. We did have a mid-campaign character change after Pima Kansere got shot in the face by her rival. She survived, but the player playing her decided that it would actually make more sense for her to work behind the scenes for a while, and introduced another character, Ganmui, who ended up joining the squad as the playbook The Rookie, which is which is a playbook specifically focused on being the new recruit to the squad, with such moves as beginner's luck and how we did it back home.
Which works really well because you literally have a squad here with an established history in game, and so they really are the rookie. It's not just someone's the rookie for the first session when you all start together.
Exactly.
That got very cool. And how do your players? It sounds like it's kind of a challenge, right? To, in the main Beam Saber campaign, you were playing for quite a while, and then you zoomed out, and then you came back to the characters. When you came back, what did it feel like in terms of, the stakes and because now you've seen a much larger world, and you've zoomed back down to, I don't want to say smaller stakes, but definitely more personal stakes. How did that feel for the players?
I think that we all sort of enjoyed cutting back and forth between the immediate action of the campaign and the sort of wider stakes. One of the things that Beam Saber does is it builds in a downtime mission cycle. And during downtime, the players have a great deal of ability to sort of go other places and do other things. They don't necessarily have to be stuck in their forward operating base the whole time. And so the players ended up having a lot of opportunities between sessions anyway, or between missions, to explore the world and have an effect beyond just their missions. And so I think everyone enjoyed the opportunity to sort of roll up their sleeves and get to work on the rest of the planet. And I think that there's always coming back for an initial session after doing that. I think that there's always sort of a little bit of getting your feet back under you with the system. But I think that we were all between the fact that the system has a lot of built-in structure for getting to the core of your character. I think that there was a lot of... I think the players had a lot of ability to sort of drop in and out of that. It's also a game that has a lot of opportunity for playing other characters anyway. Maybe this is a good opportunity for me to back up a little and talk about Beam Saber as a game.
That would be awesome.
Because, so Beam Saber is a game based on the game Blades in the Dark by... how have I just forgotten who wrote Blades in the Dark? John Harper, which is the Forged in the Dark system has sort of, to me, three main elements. The first one being the mission and downtime cycle. During missions, you accumulate stress, and in addition to, actual harm, like physical damage and things like that. You can spend stress throughout missions to do things, and that during the downtime, you in the game Blades in the Dark, which it's based on, you have to indulge your vice. But in Beam Saber, you have to cut loose to reduce your stress. And so it has that built-in cycle. But one of the effects, if you either indulge vice in Blades in the Dark or cut loose in Beam Saber, is that it's possible to overindulge. If you clear more stress than you have, there's a series of possible negative consequences that could ensue. One of which is that you might be out for the next mission. You might just be gone for the next mission, out doing whatever it is that you're doing, instead of what you're supposed to be. And and one of the things that can happen when you do that, the player obviously could sit out the next session, but since that is not usually what a player is going to want to do, then you can play a different pilot until this one returns from their quote-unquote vacation. And so it's very easy to make a new character. So, for example, we had a mission early on where the players had an opportunity to do this and decided, or rather, two of the players overindulged anyway. So the third decided, "Fuck it, I'm coming along," and they ended up 3 out of the 4 players being AWOL. So all 3 of those players rolled a new character who were like a bunch of like 4-wheeler riding stoner punks who like help out the main squad. The Howling Void was the name of their primary squad. But the squad of assistants that they had they ended up actually becoming a cohort and becoming elite rovers. But because they drove 4x4 loaders called coyotes, they became the Koi Boys.
That's extremely fun.
And so we had already played around with setting aside characters, coming back and forth between the main characters and the side characters. So I think that also helped us to be able to come back to the game, or to our main characters. The other main things about Beam Saber and Forged in the Dark games that I think really helped us characterize our campaign is the use of flashbacks. One of the main things that you can spend stress on during a mission is to flash back. The way the game puts it is that your characters are professionals. They are sitting there around the table planning out the mission. They're moving the little, models around the table for the tactical readout, or, in Blades in the Dark, they're the ones sitting out with maps and, planning the heist. And your characters do all that so that you don't have to.
Right.
When you initially start a mission, you make an engagement roll to find out if your players start in a controlled, risky, or desperate situation. And then you determine before you do that, you determine the approach. For example, whether you're going to meet it with violence, meet it with subterfuge, meet it with, there's like transport plan, there's an assault plan, there's a deception plan, there's a social plan. You only have to pick what your plan and your detail is, and you don't have to lay out all the details of the plan. And then during the session, you can spend your stress to flash back to do what you wish you had done. My favorite example of this is that if you're, like, say, in the, seedy criminal bar meeting with the grizzled gang leader trying to hire your squad and double-cross you, and you're sitting at the table with him for the meeting, and he pulls out a gun to hold you at gunpoint. This is where you might flash back to say, okay, I was here 3 hours ago before his goons patted me down, and I duct taped a blaster under the table. So you spend your stress for the flashback, you stick the gun under the table, and then back in the present, all you have to do is reach under the table and fire it. Again, your character planned for this all along, even if you didn't. And so that, being able to sort of play with the timescales like that, really streamlines the gameplay and lets you figure out what will be the most interesting thing to happen next, regardless of whether you've gone and put in whether or not you've given yourself the fictional positioning for it already. As long as you can explain how you already did it, then you can manage it.
Okay, so there already is in Beam Saber quite a lot of jumping around between characters and time frames, so maybe it's not as disorienting as it would be in, like, a lot of, D20 systems where there's this laser sharp focus. You are this character, you're inhabiting them, your abilities are their abilities, where if you zoom out at all, it can feel a little bit like, oh no,
that's metagaming.
My campaign. Oh my god, don't get started.
Right. Yeah, it is a game that encourages that quote-unquote metagaming, where it is not just about getting in your character's head to play that role, but also about looking to the story that you want to tell and using those things to tell... Using the tools of a storyteller and not just the tools of a player getting in the head of a character to play a narrow role.
Right.
It's
so
it's a game that encourages the players to all think authorally, to think about it like authors of the story as much as, characters in it.
And in this context, And in this context, they literally had been authors of the story, right? Because they had come up with so much of the backstory. Did any of the backstory from the Firebrands or from the Microscope games make it into Beam Saber flashbacks, or was it more kind of just background context for their missions? Or
I'm not sure. Actually, I think that there are times after the second Microscope game where there was room to flash back to what they were doing during those 6 months. I need this piece of technology that we don't have. Well, a few months ago, while we had all that downtime, I ended up borrowing someone's, fabrication lab for a while. But it also let us do a lot of, even if it's not a, mechanical flashback in the sense of I spend stress to do this, it gave us a lot of room to work on flashbacks for character backstory. So from the Firebrands game, for instance, one of the players was the child of one of the characters in the Firebrands game. And another of the characters from the Firebrands game ended up being, like, the doctor that the squad would call on when they needed someone with medical expertise. And certainly it provided a lot of opportunities for bringing in, Bantreish nobles or, squads referenced in those games or in the histories that we'd written, and pull that history together from what we had set down.
Right, because you have so much to draw on, and you have so much to draw on that isn't just coming from, like, the GM's notes. It's actually coming from a shared history that you'd all agreed upon.
Almost the only thing that I really, told the players about the setting rather than the other way around was I ended up drawing a map in, MS Paint, so that we could, broadly talk about where things were. And I made up most of the squads. I solicited plenty of player input on them, and, whenever anyone had a good suggestion, I would put them in as a squad. But before we did start the Beam Saber game, I had to sit down and come up with, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 30 different squads throughout the different factions, ranging from the Saplings, who were a group of heroes from the first Bontrawl War, but just a small squad of 2 sisters and a couple of their close friends, just a 4-unit squad, all ranging from that all the way up to Vaughn Resource Management presents the United Commercial Marines.
Oh no!
Yeah, or the Resolute Knighthood of the best soldiers from each of the 7 houses, the 7 most powerful Bantreish families. Other highlights include Penal Legion of soldiers who had been soldiers who had been forced into service as prisoners, locked into their own power armor suits that are their own walking prisons. There was a group of illegal tech hackers who are the ideological descendants of the creators of the Declaration of Technological Noncompliance. Jan Brown's Body is what they called themselves. And they are gun runners, hot rodders, jailbreakers, and weapons modders. If you need a weird, scary weapon that you can't get elsewhere, you talk to these guys. And I ended up doing a lot of that my own self. I ended up having to do because it would have been impractical for us to create each of the squads on our own. I think each of the players contributed at least 3 squads, but the rest I filled in myself. But other than that, almost all of the like world building and, you know, factions, characters, and so forth came straight from the players. Or, you know, from all of us together collaboratively.
So when I hear you describing, you know, the players were participating in the world building, not just in terms of the grand scope of things, but also down to the level of developing individual factions for the Beam Saber campaign?
Individual squads, in fact, yeah.
Right. This is a commitment you're asking for from your players on a pretty large scale compared to most tabletop RPG situations. How did you manage that? I guess first off, were these people you played with a lot before? And second off, how did you go about documenting everything and kind of soliciting everything in a way that made all the world building you were doing, either microscope or otherwise, feel like it was for keeps?
As far as getting player buy-in, we made it pretty clear up top that we were all into the idea of world building heavy and like very collaborative gameplay there. Again, several of us were Friends at the Table fans and appreciate the deep world building that they do on that show and in their campaigns. And so getting the it wasn't, I did not have to work to get the players bought in to building the world with me. I had played several one-shots with the players, but part of why we wanted to play a couple of games before we ever got to Beam Saber was to build a little bit more working rapport between us as players.
Yes.
And as far as documenting and feeling like we were playing for keeps as far as all of the world building, we used a Google Doc for we didn't play Microscope in person to begin with. For one, this was I'm trying to remember. This was before the pandemic, but
wow.
Oh, I remember why we couldn't play in person is because 2 of the players were in New York City for the winter selling Christmas trees. So we did a play-by-post sort of game where we would, like, you know, use the Discord channel that we had in order to, like, make sure we knew whose turn it was and stuff like that. But we played the game of Microscope over the course of several weeks, just entering in new details on the Google Doc as we went. So we were already using like Google Docs to keep all of our documentation. So, and I also had access to a set of like Google Sheets, character sheets for the different Beam Saber playbooks. That I was, with enough kludging, able to use for everything we needed for the players. And then I built, using, I think, a combination of existing sheets and my own, I was able to build out the rest of the pages I needed for the squad pages and the maps and the mission records. That is to say, the, like... Each mission has clocks, and that's how there's a mission clock that different actions will fill up ticks on this clock. Enemies are usually represented by clocks. Most of the things in the game are clocks. So there was a sheet where we could keep track of all of the clocks. It even has like the fancy like Google Sheets like rules where like if you put a 1 in the box it turns green, if you put a 6 in the box it turns red or whatever, so that we can like you can see the clock going from green to red as the situation gets worse or whatever. So we were able to use those really well to keep copies of everything all on one like 38 tab Google Sheet. But we also would like use Google Docs either as a separate doc, or in a few cases what we did was we used a separate doc for taking notes on games that weren't Beam Saber, and then would copy in the notes from there. For instance, there was a point at which we knew we wanted to put the camera on the transit gates that, control access to and from the Bantral system, but had no way of getting the players out there to space. And we were in the mood to sort of change it up a little bit, so we decided to play the game Fiasco, which is a storytelling game sort of in the idiom of like a Coen Brothers movie. A bunch of terrible people making terrible choices, having terrible things happen to them and everyone around them. And so we took our notes for that game on a separate doc, and then copied in the sort of Cliff Notes version of what happened in the different scenes into our Beam Saber documents, so that we could, have it all in one place. Same with when we did play at least a couple of different games of Firebrands interspersed within the main Beam Saber game. Firebrands is probably my single favoritist tabletop game of all time. I also wrote a hack of it for that reason. And a friend of mine was like, well, it sounds fun, but I don't like sci-fi. And I'm like, okay, well, what if we just change all of the mechs to like magic or whatever? So that I ended up just writing a like fantasy themed hack of it. But whenever we would play Firebrands interspersed throughout, we would do the same thing. Whenever we wanted to do, given that we were basically playing a mech anime, we decided to consider those OVAs. What is it? Original video anime, the movies they release between the main show. So it was a lot of fun to be able to change it up that way, and yeah, we would keep all the notes in the same place in the Google Sheet.
And it sounds like, because we've used some metaphors like, oh, we're going to move the camera, we're going to zoom out, and at this point you've just come out and said it, that this, to everyone playing, the genre expectation was we're in an anime.
For the most part, there is a small amount of like, we would say in the anime of this, or in the big budget Michael Bay movie of this, or in the etc. We would play with the genre and the medium some that way. If we wanted to talk about something in terms of, oh, this would be in the comic book version of this or whatever, we could play fast and loose with that, but we were all definitely thinking about it cinematically or novelistically in that sense, where, yeah, there was a lot of, how do you do this? What does the camera show? Like, if you're looking at the room, if you're wanting to do a survey roll, well, instead of just saying, okay, I survey the room, what does the camera show us so that we know that you're looking around this room analyzing it? And it doesn't have to be the, like, BBC Sherlock, you look at the thing and it goes, wing, wing, or whatever. But, like, what does the camera show to tell us, oh, this is the part where this character is looking into that, is surveying the room. So we definitely thought cinematically about it throughout.
And not just cinematically in the sense of when you're describing a huge battle, but it sounds like even the human scale interactions in this, there was a notional camera, there was an audience that you were portraying things for.
Absolutely, even though the audience was also just us. But yeah, we would say things in terms of, well, yes, the audience at home would recognize this because it's the same whatever from this other scene. Like, we would specifically reference the hypothetical audience when talking about, what we are intending to convey.
And are you doing that because it just kind of helps make it concrete what you're all visualizing? Are you doing that to remind you of the tropes at play? Why was that metaphor so helpful in the game?
personally, because I think being able to access those storytelling tropes easily definitely helps, I think, not just get everyone on the same page with what we're picturing, but also to get everyone on the same page about like how we should consider the emotional impact and how we should hand wave how it makes sense. Like, obviously in the middle of a mech fight, it doesn't make that much sense for you and your opponent to be having a long drawn out conversation. But we all, at least those of us who watch enough Gundam, all know I'm yelling at you through my headphones. I'm yelling at you through my, like, talking back and forth with the other pilot as you fight. So being able to say, oh yeah, this is absolutely the, like, we've got the split screen and I'm yelling into my, headset on one side, and being able to, like, reference those tropes absolutely helped us with the storytelling of what we were trying to get out there. But I also do think that, like, being able to, tell us what the camera sees helps get the players thinking about the environment around them in a way that I think does help make concrete the sort of abstract of, I want to accomplish this goal. More than that, I think it really helps the player feel like they are their character is inhabiting a space and playing a role.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like, especially in this campaign, where there is that genre awareness, right? In a way that a lot of sword and sorcery, D&D, Pathfinder type campaigns, it's a little bit discouraged, I think, and this goes back to the metagaming. It's a little bit discouraged to be aware of the genre you're in, and it's discouraged to be, like, aware of the tropes. But it sounds like in this campaign, everyone was fine knowing the tropes of the world they were in.
I think that when you play the game about the big fighting giant robots, you kind of have to buy yourself in on all right, we're playing with giant robots now. Oh, we're in it now. Like, I think that you really do have to, like, really buy in on the we're playing with giant robots now, in a way that is really hard to separate. In that, to me, it is a genre that is much more. I don't want to say more tropey, because that's not how tropes work, but it is definitely has a lot more to lean on. And again, a system that encourages thinking about things that way and not just about the, like, getting in your character's head style of roleplay. So for another detail, like, on how Beam Saber encourages that, there are moves that are explicitly designed to play with those tropes and are triggered by things that are not just I activate my barbarian strength activation. So, for example, the rookie has a move called Beginner's Luck. When you get a +4 result on a roll, you can remove the highest die to refresh your spark, which can turn a success into a failure, but you can spend that spark to change a failed roll into a partial success. But, like, it's not just, this is an ability I have on the math. It's Beginner's Luck. This is the thing that you do because your character, the rookie, knows that, like, sometimes you just, whoop, you get that beginner's luck on that thing, and you no one else could have done it, but you made it work. There is a move in this game that lets you basically declare that the character is not going to survive the encounter, and in the process get a lot of like mechanical benefits. It's called Pineapple Salad. If you and the target player both agree, describe the plans your pilots made to spend time together. Add up to 4 ticks combined on your connection clock for each other. Your connection clock being what you use for things like helping other players and things like that. So this is a strong mechanical benefit.
Right.
And then one of you immediately takes harm with a level equal to the number of ticks. And a level 3 harm needs help, and a level 4 harm is like dead or dying. So you can add four ticks to your clock with your connection clock with each other to be able to, like, you know, spend to roll a help roll, and then immediately take, you know, basically it gives you the option to say, I'm going to give this other player 4 extra dice on a roll, and then immediately die. And it is inherently tropey, because the whole point is that you are describing the plans you made to spend time together after the mission, and playing with the narrative irony of knowing it, as you do in the mech anime, when the two characters sit down and, wow, we have so much in common. I'm glad that we're so close now. After this mission, which we're both absolutely, totally, definitely going to survive, we're going to have so much beautiful time together.
And this is really just on the nose, too, because, like, Pineapple Salad is the name of a Super Dimension Fortress Macross episode.
Yes.
Right? Like,
where this happens.
They're really just... Right. Spoilers, I guess.
Well,
we'll tag this for spoilers for this 35-year-old show. I guess my one big question left about roleplay is... what's it like for the players to act like humans interacting in a world where they know that there's the heavy hand of all these tropes at play? As you said, we're in giant robots. We've already bought into this. But what is it like to actually interact knowing that, you know, overhead we're living in this incredibly tropey universe, I'll say?
So I actually think this is a case where the... mission and downtime cycle really helps, because during the missions it's easy to play with the tropes of, you know, how mech combat works and all of that, or, like, say if they're doing a heist, to play with the tropes of a heist movie and so forth. But one of the things that I really love about downtime in Beam Saber is that during downtime, to clear stress, almost every downtime, you will be using the downtime action Cut Loose. In Blades in the Dark, your Indulge Vice is just something that you do just by yourself. But in Beam Saber, when you cut loose, you always have to cut loose with another pilot. The move says, pick another pilot and describe how the two of you spend time dealing with the pressure. And then you roll dice equal to your connection clock and heal stress equal to the highest die result. And then you add a tick to the connection clock and add a new belief about the other pilot. So each of your pilots will have beliefs about the other. For instance, Ozzy Ein has the belief about Ganmui the Rookie. This war is changing Ganmui. I need to make sure he doesn't lose himself.
Well, that's kind of tragic.
And one of the things that you can get experience for during the mission is you know, using your beliefs. And so not only does that encourage you to, like, remember this role-playing element between you, and this is how I feel about your character, but it mechanizes leaning on what you believe about each other as characters and bringing it up in play so that you can, at the end of the mission, when I ask, you know, did you invoke your connections history or whatever, then you can be like, yeah, I sat down and I had that conversation with Gamui where I told him, hey, this war is changing you, don't lose yourself.
And so even though it's so tropey, there's heavy mechanical support for saying, no, you actually have to sit down and interact like your characters actually are people as well.
And the cut loose scenes are some of my favorite gameplay, because it's, what does your character do to go chill out. And sometimes it's, I go to the, mech pilot bar where everyone has agreed is a, neutral zone. So we can all go, drink there together or, race for pink slips or whatever. But you can't just do that. You have to choose who's coming with you to have your back there. There was one where, after a particularly difficult mission, one of the players was just like, no, I'm just going to run. I'm just going to get in my mech and pick a direction and run as far as I can. So then that makes you have to think, who would do this with me? Who
Right.
would come with me? And what do we talk about while we are out doing it? And, it strongly encourages you to play out the scene so you can get that mechanized time to sit there and do that character work.
In building this campaign and, in the work that you did to come up with the sequence where you played Microscope, Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands, Beam Saber, more Microscope, Beam Saber, Fiasco, Beam Saber. I guess other than a giant Google Sheet, thank you for sharing your 100-tab Google Sheet with me, by the way. What other resources did you use to plan all this and keep track of what was going on? Other than just kind of having this shared Google Drive?
I'm going to find... Give me 1 second. My big stack of documents. Jake is leaning forward to squint at the screen to see my big accordion folder of all of my, printouts and documents and things that I keep in my filing cabinet. I have right here the note cards where I wrote down on note cards all of the Microscope eras and scenes and everything so that I could diagram them all on a table for myself while we played, even though we were playing online. I have a couple of notebooks full of just jotted notes in here. So I also just, kept a bunch of stuff in actual, literal, physical folders.
Wow!
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that's like 3 years into the campaign and you have everything's in a literal folder.
I am not a well-organized person, which is why it is all the more important that I designated a section in my filing cabinet somewhere between my tax paperwork and my checkbooks or whatever to be, this is where I dump tabletop stuff.
I kind of know the feeling. In my filing cabinet, there's a drawer that's a combination all my tax records ever, my immigration paperwork, and Riley's podcast production notes.
The 3 most important things.
Of course. Are there any particular shows or books or manga or anything that really inspired you in putting everything together?
So again, cannot give enough shout outs to Friends at the Table. Austin Walker is an extremely good example of how to GM and how to set up campaigns. I don't know if they still offer it, but on their Patreon for a while, they had a drawing maps segment where Austin would do session prep and record it and put it up on the Patreon, to show how he was prepping out, upcoming, missions and things like that. So in a direct tabletop way, that is definitely a big inspiration. But as far as other media and things like that, there's a lot of Gundam in our DNA. There's, I think, Iron-Blooded Orphans and 8th MS Team, I think, would probably be the 2 Gundam series that have the most influence here. 8th MS Team just, it's what if the Vietnam War but giant robots, and had a lot of that, focused in on just, these aren't necessarily the guys who are in the big super special hero Gundams with the magic computer psychic powers and the best Gundam the world has ever seen. These are a bunch of guys out in the woods getting, eaten up by mosquitoes and, like, down on the ground level of the conflict. And Beam Saber really focuses on that, like, ground level of the combat, or of the conflict. So, like, 8th MS Team, I think, is a strong influence there. Also, Battletech. I'm a big fan of Battletech in all of its horrible 80s world-building glory. And so, and especially the way Battletech builds a world where hereditary nobility ossified itself with these big, old hereditary family machines that are like robots older than your great-great-grandparents that we don't even hardly know how to fix anymore, as your, like, ceremonial mech of that you, this young princeling, get to pilot around for your family or whatever. There's a lot of that. And it's definitely clear that Firebrands takes a lot of influence from Battletech and that sort of, not exactly space fantasy, that almost, that like medieval space opera of it all. I think, so there's a lot of that went into sort of knowing the arcs and direction of the campaign. It was also easy for me to see the sort of 3-act structure. I think of games in terms of 3-act structure a lot. I mostly play one-shot games. Like, that's where my heart really is one-shots.
Right.
And the key to a good one-shot is knowing when to do exposition, when to do the rising action, and when to hit the climax and finale. And I knew I wanted a sort of 3-act game structure to the campaign, which ended up with Season 1 being about, relatively low stakes. Like, there's no war. It's not a war. We're just, having some border issues. We're just having some, internal conflicts. It's no big. Don't worry about it.
And this is within Beam Saber.
Within Beam Saber, yes. We wanted that first quote unquote season. The first, I think, how many sessions? It was our first 8 sessions. 9. Our first 9 missions. Which was probably many more sessions than that. We very rarely got through a mission per session.
Right.
But our first 9 missions, I knew that I wanted it to be an arc of going from, y'all are a bunch of, like, you joined the military because no one is, like, there's a lot of tension and a lot of people sort of shooting at each other and not a lot of, like, intense combat, not a lot of, like, lives can be lost, but we're not talking about the meat grinder of war here. All the way through, those tensions boiling over into open conflict and, like, direct warfare. And then Season 2 was, this is the real war, and war is hell, and this is, like, things are real now. We're talking body counts. We're talking y'all are in mortal peril regularly. We're talking you don't have the freedoms you had, in Season 1 to go hang out at the bar, on the other side of the planet without your squad because the war has come to there now. And Season 3, if we ever get back to playing it, will be the space season. Where they go to space to try to secure the orbital gate against the Solar Union.
When Season 3 happens, please let me know so you can tell us how it went.
I will absolutely update you. I also
thank you.
I also had a suspicion, knowing my players as I do, and being a bunch of, like, dirty anarchist punks like we all are. I had a strong suspicion that the players were going to be dissatisfied with the Bantral Free Forces, who are, in Beam Saber terms, the democracy faction, but who exist in a state of compromise where they're not exactly centrists by, like, you know, American political standards. They're fairly left-wing, but as a faction, they do not advocate seceding from the Solar Union altogether. They want Solar Union law to protect their assertion that Bantral should be able to determine its own affairs and that people should be able to live freely. They want the Solar Union to say, actually, all these noble titles are abolished, you know, rather than being in open conflict with the Solar Union. And of course, the heads of the Bantral Free Forces would argue, well, if it became open conflict, then, you know, the Solar Union would absolutely crack down on us and then no one wins. And they aren't necessarily even wrong. But I knew that the players would not be satisfied with that sort of centrism.
Compromise.
Yes, that sort of compromise. I don't think so I knew the players would be satisfied with that. So I looked for opportunities to lean on them that way, put them in conflict with the brass. You know, leave them wanting to defy orders. And then I introduced, from the, Mobile Frame Zero, like very short lore section in the, like, rules for the shooting each other with Legos part of it. It talks about the Free Colonies movement. So I introduced the Free Colonies movement to Bantral with the caveat that while they oppose the Solar Union, they are completely happy to work with the Bantreish or the Gazena or, you know, a lot of the factions on the planet that the players didn't want to work with. Because the Free Colonies movement were much more interested in the abolition or secession from the Solar Union and were much more willing to work with people who were ideologically opposed in other aspects, but agreed with them on that. And I knew that giving the players the option of, do you work with the ones who want to abolish the government but also work with the right wing? Or do you want to work with the centrist left that wants to remain part of the, you know, world government? And I knew that they would be dissatisfied with both options. So it was really fun to watch them try to square that politically for themselves and for their characters. And where we left off, they had actually just gathered all of the resources and political capital necessary to found their own faction. Pulled from like-minded squads from other factions. In fact, they finished bankrolling this, because Ivy Ark happens to be the daughter of the head of the most powerful Gazena mob family. Her cousin wanted to take over the family and offered to bankroll her attempts to make a new faction in exchange for her assassinating her father and putting him in charge of the family. So they ended up, setting up basically a mob movie hit where they, like, planned out this, like, heist, except that the center of the heist was shooting her dad in the head. And the players executed this whole complicated thing. It's going off the rails. It is, as far as I'm concerned as a GM, it is beautiful in its chaos. Ivy makes it to her father in the inner sanctum of his house and says, "You're going to bankroll my new faction because Wolfie wanted me to take you out, and I'm not going to do that. Instead, you're going to work with me on this." Double-crossed her cousin and got the money, but with strings attached. So, like,
You absolutely have to get your players back together because I really want to know how this ends.
It is a phenomenal, like, all of my players have the the right attitude, the same attitude that I have, where it is not about making the right choices, it's about making the most interesting choices. It's about saying what is going to be the most interesting thing to happen next, not about what is the best thing for me to do to, succeed in this mission. You want to win the mission, but you also want to do the most fun thing to do it.
That sounds like an incredibly fun table to play with. Erika, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about this campaign. You sound like one of the funnest GMs I've ever heard about, and I'm envious of your table. You all sound like you have so much fun together.
We should play a session of something sometime. It is I really enjoy again, like I said, I'm all about the one shots. So this has been a blast. It has been so fun to talk about this campaign with you. We should totally play something sometime, with or without months of world building ahead of time.
It sounds great to me. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's all for this week.
Thanks so much to Erika for coming on Campaign Spotlight.
I'm Dungeon Inspector Jake.
And I'm Production Master Riley.
If you're enjoying the show, subscribe and leave a review.
It helps other people find the show and keeps the primordial serpents beneath the Earth's crust in a state of peaceful slumber.
For more on the show, including links to all our social media, visit foldedfrequencies.com/campaignspotlight.
All right, what do you think of that?
Perfect.